Today is 14th November 2012. This evening, the topic of discussion is about three types of abandonment of defilements. If one wishes to live happily, peacefully, then one needs to abandon all the mental defilements. One has to put forth effort to develop insight knowledge or wisdoms through the practice of Satipatthana meditation. But as long as one has not yet fully understood suffering, one may not put forth effort to abandon the cause of suffering. The cause of suffering is defilements such as tanha, craving or thirst is the second noble truth of suffering. Other defilements are also the cause of suffering. But this defilement of factors or samyojana is the Buddha say is the greatest factors, and due to these factors, beings have been roaming and wandering through the cycle of birth and death again and again. So this tanha, craving or thirst, is the strongest factors of defilement. So as long as the cause is not abandoned, then one will be going in this cycle of birth and death, which is known as samsara, again and again. One could not put forth effort. Sometimes it's due to, or we can say due to the sense of urgency or the feeling of samvega is not strong. If one rightly understands the truth of suffering, for example, suffering in the being born in the four lower existences or the four apaya worlds, then one may this feeling of samvega or sense of urgency will be arising. In other words, if one rightly understands that as long as one is not enlightened, one maybe will be falling into this four apaya world again, or when the unwholesome deeds are ripening. So if you are fear to be born in this apaya world again, then you would put forth effort to develop the mind or to develop wisdoms, so that eventually you could attain enlightenment and will not be born in this four apaya world again. So in other words, as a worldlings, putujanas are not free from these dangers of falling into the apaya world, because the worldlings, putujanas, view the things different from the Arya Pugala, the noble ones. For example, if you ask a putujana, a worldlings, look at the oceans, and what do these putujana see? So, as a putujana, what would they see? or when they look at the oceans. But Aryapugala, maybe yes, Aryapugala would see it differently. He say all these are not water.
ท่านจะ sorry sir
all these are not water.
ท่านจะตอบว่าที่เห็นอยู่เหล่านั้นไม่ใช่น้
ำ all these are tears of worldlings who have been roaming, wandering through this long course of samsara, the cycle birth and death. So once the Buddha say this samsara, the cycle of birth and death is without discoverable beginning. So the first point of beginning cannot be discerned, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. So beings have been roaming and wandering in this samsara or again. Then he asked the monk, what do you think? Which is more, the stream of tears that you have shed as you wander and roam through this samsara, crying, weeping, lamenting, because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable. Compare with the four oceans, which one is more? So which one is more? The tears you have shed in this long course of samsara is more, or the water in the four great oceans is more. So according to the teaching, or the tears we have shed in this long course of samsara is much more than the water in these four great oceans. So in this long course of samsara, the cycle of birth and death, we have been crying, weeping, lamenting because of united with disagreeable and separated with agreeable. So in this long course of samsara, we have been experienced the death of mother, or the death of father, the loss of wealth, the loss of health, and because of this, we have been crying, weeping, lamenting. So do you agree what the Buddha taught? So if you really understand, then the Buddha say it's enough for you to experience revulsions or disgust. It means one feel experience revulsion or disgust towards all the formation, and to become dispassionate towards them, and enough to be liberated from them. But if one has not really understood the truth, the suffering in this samsara, one would be very passionate, or becomes very passionate with everything. So this discourse is brought up for your contemplation, for your reflections. So if you wish to be liberated from this samsara, then what should you do? Then you have to follow the path of Dharma. You have to accumulate merits as a support to your cultivations, or to follow the path of Dharma. Without the support and merits, you may not be able to attain the final liberations of enlightenment. So those who have gone to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha for refuge, or they may know about doing merits or accumulating punya. So you know what's punya? Merits. So one may perform dana, giving, sharing, observing the 5 moral precepts, observe the uposatha days, and so on. But one must rightly understand what is merits, and one should perform with right mental states or mental attitude. Sometimes one performs merits with the aim or desires for better rebirths, to be born wealthy again, or to be born in the Deva world, and so on. So when one performs merits with such mental attitude or aims, then it's not really merits. Then this way of performing merits is just like investments in business venture. But this word punya explains by the commentators as that which purges and purifies the mental continuum. Which purges and purifies the mental continuum. So if you perform meritorious deeds, for example with craving for some gain of fame, so it is what we call punya or merits. So you know what the meaning of purge or purging. That which purges and purifies the mental continuum. Do you know the meaning of purging? Purge. Just like one goes for body cleansing the body. So doctors will give some laxative to take. So eventually, by taking this laxative, all the toxin will be purged out. So this marriage is also help to purge out your gross defilements, such as greed, strong attachments, pride, craving, and so attachments to the self, me, I, and so on. So if one performs merits with a lot of pride or craving, then the mind is not purified. If one performs merits with a lot of ego, then the mind is not purified. Sometimes one may even have anger while doing some meritorious actions. Some may desire for fame. So when one performs with a defiled mind, then that defiled mind will not be ready or become a conditions for the growth of wisdoms or insight knowledge. So when one performs merits, the right mental attitude is important. So when one performs merits with right attitude, then these merits of punya will become a conditions for you to follow the path of the Dharma, the path of the practice, and eventually attain the supramundane wisdoms and enlightenment. So when you perform merits with right mental attitude, or then before you attain the final enlightenment, then you may always born in a favorable place where there's Buddha Sasana, or you encounter good friends to guide you along the path of the Dharma. You always meet with opportunity for spiritual growth, and finally you may able to develop wisdoms until attainment of enlightenment. So even as a vipassana meditators, before you attain the supramundane wisdoms or any stage of enlightenment, when you're mindful from one moment to next moment, we can say that you're also accumulating merits. But in the course of the practice before the attainment of supramundane wisdoms, if you becomes, for example, very proud of your practice, always think that you are better than others, then this can become a hindrance to the progress. So whenever we're doing any merits, the mind or the mental state, mental attitude is very important. So how do you perform your merits? So once the Buddha said, abandon what is unwholesome. One can abandon the unwholesome. If it were not possible, the Buddha said, I will not ask you to do so. If this abandoning of the unwholesome would bring harm and suffering, I will not ask you to abandon it. But as the abandoning of unwholesome brings benefit and happiness, therefore the Buddha said, abandon what is unwholesome. Then Buddha said, cultivate what is wholesome. One can cultivate the wholesome. If it were not possible, the Buddha said, I will not ask you to do so. So if this cultivation of wholesome would bring harm and suffering, I will not ask you to cultivate it. But the cultivation of wholesome would bring benefit and happiness. Therefore, the Buddha says, cultivate the wholesome. So, do you think you have this effort to abandon the unwholesome and at the same time cultivate the wholesome? So, when you cultivate the wholesome, confidence is also one of the wholesome quality, mindfulness, non-greed, non-hatred, or in other words, the practice of generosity, loving kindness, compassion, wisdoms. This is what we call the wholesome. So, as you develop what's wholesome, relatively what is unwholesome become less and less, or weaker. So, as you perform various kinds of meritorious actions, when you observe the morality, develop concentration and insight knowledge, then relatively what is unwholesome become less and less, or weaker and weaker. But when one performs various kinds of merits, and observe the morality, develop concentration and insight knowledge, and when insight knowledge is progressing from one stage to next stage, But if one becomes more conceit or very proud, then this may not be able to pave the way to the supramundane wisdoms or enlightenment. So as you meditate, develop mindfulness, insight knowledge, you may know from your mental states whether your mind becomes better and better, or more and more wholesome, or the mind becomes more and more conceited, has a lot of pride, or craving for fame, and so on. So we need to put effort all the time, constantly, continuously, not only in the retreats but outside the retreats. So just like the smith removes the dross of silver or the gold. In one of the Dhammapada verses, the Buddha said, by degrees, little by little, from moment to moment, a wise man removes his own impurities, or in other words, moral defilements, as a smith removes the dross of silver or gold. So when we practice mindfulness meditation, vipassana meditations, as you develop mindfulness from one moment to moment, when you develop concentration from one moment to another moment, when you carry forward your experience of insight knowledge from one moment to next moment, it could also help you to remove the defilements little by little. For example, when you are mindful of the movements of the abdomen, your mindfulness has to be attentive, energetic, and precise on the movements of the abdomen. So at the beginning, you may not be able to perceive the rising movements and the falling movements clearly. Sometimes you may think the rising and the falling movements is one and the same continuous movements. But when your mindfulness becomes more and more attentive, precise to the movements, then you begin to see that rising movements is one process, falling movements is another process. You perceive that there's a subtle gap between the movements. The movements is not joined together. Then as the mindfulness becomes more and more attentive, precise, the movements of the rising and the movements of falling becomes clearer and clearer to the mind. So when you're mindful of the rising, falling movements, rising and falling movements, your mindfulness should be more and more attentive and precise to the process of the movements. If you pay attention to the shape or the form of the abdomen, then you may not be able to realize the true nature of the movements. Similarly, when meditators are mindful of the movements of the foot during walking meditation, they should be mindful. In other words, mindfulness to be attentive, precise to the process of the movements. Similarly, in the mindfulness of daily activities, meditators doing many movements, stretching, bending, lifting, sitting down, standing up, walking from place to place, opening the door, closing the doors, there are so many movements. If meditators wish to realize all these movements in their true natures, then they have to slow down the movements more and more. And the mindfulness and the noting should be more and more in details. In other words, meditators have to note closely the movements such as stretching from one movement to next movement. So when meditators could mindful of all these movements well, then when the concentration becomes stronger and stronger, meditators will be realizing the true nature of the movements. In other words, movements as movements. For example, when meditators mindful of the rising movements, meditators only experience these movements. Meditators could not sense the shape or the form of the abdomen. At that moment, meditators also experience that there's a process of noting mind, being aware of being mindful of the movements. If the mindfulness and concentration are very strong, sometimes meditators could not sense the body form. So the meditators could not identify these movements and the noting mind with a person, with a being, a self or a soul. So at that moment, meditators discern that there's a mental process, there's a noting mind, and the physical process, there's the movements. So apart from these two processes, there's nothing else. So at that moment, the view of the self or being a person is removed by that experience. So this experience is known as insight knowledge of discerning mentality and physicality. So at that time, DT, the wrong view of a person, being, a self, is removed by that knowledge. So such removal of the defilements, DT, is known as the Tatanga Pahana. That means the defilements is replaced by the opposites, or there's an insight knowledge. So the Buddhist dictionaries gives a simile, just like the sun rises, darkness disappears. When the sun sets, darkness come back again. But when your mindfulness, concentration, and experience is strong, then these defilements, DT, will be removed at that moment. So this Tatanga Pahana will pave the way for the meditators to attain the final abandonment. That's known as Samucceda Pahana. So when one attains the path knowledge, the defilements, in other words, the latent defilements will be eradicated or uprooted completely. For example, when one attains the first stage of path knowledge, Sotapatti Magga Yana, then the defilements, DT and doubt or Vicikicca will be uprooted completely. So when these two defilements, or DT and Vicikicca, are uprooted, then one will not fall into the apaya world in the future existences. One who has attained the first stage of enlightenment, then one will never violate the morality such as the observance of 5 precepts. One's confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha will become firm, will not change for forever. But there's another explanation for Tatanga Pahana. Some teachers explain Tatanga Pahana as a partial remover. Defilements could be arising when one is not mindful of the sense door. For example, seeing a visible object, hearing a sound or the voice. For example, when one hears a voice or sound that's not agreeable to him or her, then the feeling of aversion or anger could be arising. When one sees a visible object that's not agreeable to him or her, or the aversions or anger could be arising. But if one knows the practice of Satipatthana meditation, then one should be mindful of the hearing or the seeing. For example, when one hears a sound or a voice that's not agreeable, then he should be mindful of hearing. And at the beginning, the mindfulness may be not attentive, precise to the hearings. The awareness or the attention of mind is on that sound, on that voice. And then aversion or anger arises. Then one should apply mindfulness on that defilements and be mindful and note aversion. If there's anger, mindful and note anger. So eventually that aversion or anger disappeared. Then when one hears the same sound or the same voice again, the anger could be arising again, or the aversion could be arising again. So when one keeps on practicing and be mindful and note the anger aversions, eventually the anger aversions becomes weaker. Then maybe it will not arise easily. Then when the mindfulness becomes sharper, quicker, one would be able to mindful and note hearing. When that sound or the voice that's not agreeable to him or her comes into contact with the ear. So when one could mindful and note hearing attentively, precisely, one realizes that hearing as hearing. So when you could mindful and note hearing, you also realizes that hearing is not permanent. It arises and passes away very instantly. So when you realize hearing is not permanent, at that time, do you know is the sound that is arising and passing away, or the consciousness that is arising and passing away? What do you think? Which object or phenomena that is a subject to arising and passing away at that moment when you are mindful and not hearing? The sound. So when you're mindful hearing, where should you focus your mindfulness? On the sound, or on the ear, or on the consciousness?
At the conscious.
So you should mindful of the hearing consciousness. So this consciousness is one of the 5 aggregates. Similarly, when you're mindful of seeing, smelling, tasting, touching. You should be, your mindfulness should be precise on the consciousness of seeing, smelling, and so on. So when you could be mindful and not hearing, and realizing that hearing is impermanent, then do you think the anger or aversion will arise? So in that way, defilements could not arise when you mindful and of hearing of this disagreeable sound or the voice. So such removal of defilements is known as partial removal or tatanga pahana. In other words, when you see something, see a visible object that's not agreeable, then it's anger or aversion still could be arising. So in other words, if anyone or meditators could be very mindful of the context between the sense object and the sense door, then they could overcome the defilements, or the defilements cannot arise. But to remove or to uproot the mental defilements completely, one has to attain all the four stages of path knowledge. Because only the path knowledge has a function to remove or to uproot the latent defilements. But if one only practices samatha meditation, concentration meditation, one cannot remove the defilements in this way. When one practices samatha meditation, such as metta bhavana, loving kindness meditations, and attain absorption concentrations, and with the attainment of absorption concentration, the defilements are suppressed by that absorption concentration. So when defilements are suppressed by absorption concentrations, this way of removal or abandonment of defilements is known as vikampana pahana. So this type of removal is not permanent, or it's only lasts temporarily. So when one stops the practice, when the mind is no longer concentrate on the object of samatha meditation, defilements may arise again whenever there's condition. So which type of abandonment or removal you prefer? Samujjeda pahana. So to attain samujjeda pahana, one has to develop insight, knowledge, or wisdom. So once the Buddha said, insignificant is the increase of wealth, fame, relative, but the increase of wisdom is the highest gain. Or the Buddha said, insignificant is the loss of wealth, the loss of fame, relative. The loss of wisdom is the greatest loss. So the Buddha said, therefore, you should train yourself that we will grow in the increase of wisdoms. Or in other words, the wisdoms will be keep on increasing, growing. You should train yourself in this way. So if you expect growth of wisdoms, then you should develop insight knowledge through the practice of satipatthana meditation or diligently. No one can offer you these wisdoms. Others can only encourage you, give you motivations, so that you could put forth effort, so that you have confidence in the practice. So I wish everyone could practice Satipatthana Vipassana meditation diligently with a sense of urgency. In other words, the feeling of samvega, develop mindfulness from one moment to next moment, concentration from one moment to next moment. The knowledge is carried forward from one moment to next moment until the attainment of supramundane wisdoms and liberated from this samsara.
สาธุสา